Consciousness returned to Artyom slowly. Consciousness returned to Artyom slowly, reluctantly. At first it was just a distant, persistent noise, the piercing cry of a seagull and the heavy rhythmic slap of water against wood. It smelled of pine tar, sea salt, and something rotten. A deep, penetrating cold made him shiver, lying on something hard and wet. He groaned, trying to remember. Yesterday was the project deadline, his third coffee, a night spent staring at the monitor. Then a sharp pain in his chest, a collapse onto the keyboard, and darkness. A heart attack? So this is what the afterlife looks like. Surprisingly tactile. Artyom forced his eyes open. His vision was filled with a low gray sky from which a nasty cold drizzle was falling. He was lying at the bottom of a wooden boat, rocking rhythmically on the waves. Turning his head, he saw a bearded man in worn-out clothes leaning into an oar, rowing the boat toward the shore. Some kind of reenactment was his first muddled thought. The man noticed he was awake and let out a hoarse chuckle. Oh, alive after all. Thought the hook-fingered salmon had sent you to the other side. Lucky you, lad. Not many survive a shipwreck on these rocks. Artyom tried to sit up. His whole body ached, and his head was buzzing. Shipwreck? His own voice was a hoarse croak. Where am I? What is this place? Where else? The rower grinned, showing a few missing teeth. Skyrim, land of the Nords. Your little vessel, the Storm Petrel, was smashed to splinters on the reefs last night. Me and the boys picked through the wreckage, saved who we could. You were thrown onto a piece of debris, clinging to it like a barnacle in love with a rock. Skyrim, Nords. The words echoed in Artyom's memory with a dull, growing rumble. He looked around. The boat was approaching a wooden dock of a small settlement squeezed between harsh cliffs in a cold sea. The air held a familiar yet impossible mix of smells. Wood smoke, wet wool, and damp earth. He saw the people, men in chainmail and leather armor, women in simple dresses with aprons. He knew this place. He had spent hundreds of hours here. It was Windhelm, the real, tangible, fish-smelling thing. It can't be, he whispered. This is a game. A game? The rower asked, mooring the boat. What game is there to play here? It's about survival, with these dragons and bandits on the roads, and the Jarl in his castle. Come on, out you get, you landlubber. Lucky for you that I dash. The last thing I remembered from my world was a pressing pain in my temples, the bitter taste of burnt coffee on my tongue, and the blurred lines of code on the monitor. Debugging at 3 a.m. My hands reached for a pack of cigarettes on their own, even though I'd quit 2 years ago. With a bleary gaze, I saw the Skyrim landscape on my desktop wallpaper, snowy peaks against the northern lights. I wish I could escape there, flashed a foolish, exhaustion-thinned thought. Then, a sharp, burning stab somewhere in my chest, a piercing, tearing pain. I tried to inhale and couldn't. The monitor swam, turning into a green smear. I felt myself falling from the chair, my temple hitting the edge of the desk, all of it in complete, ringing silence. The last sensation, the cold linoleum against my cheek, and then I was vomited back into existence. First, it wasn't a sound, but a vibration, a dull, rhythmic thumping, slap, 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 wood against water. I was lying on something hard, wet, and incredibly uncomfortable. My entire back was stiff, my clothes were soaked through and freezing my skin. My tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth, and my throat tasted of salt and something bitter, rotten. I groaned, trying to move. My eyelids were made of lead. Oh, alive after all. A hoarse, smoke-roughened voice sounded right next to my ear. Thought the hook-fingered salmon had delivered you to Akatosh himself. I forced my eyes open. Right above me I saw a face, weathered, bearded, with a network of deep wrinkles around the eyes and a couple of missing teeth. He smelled of cheap ale, fish, and sweat. He sat on a bench, working a long wooden oar with force. I tried to sit up. I stirred, and my whole body exploded in pain. Every muscle, every bone ached and screamed. My head was splitting. Lie still, landlubber," the rower grumbled. "Guess you feasted on seawater all night. Lucky we found you." I looked around and my insides dropped. I was sailing in a rickety wooden boat down a wide, turbulent river. Harsh cliffs rose on the banks covered in coniferous forest. Ahead, at the confluence of two rivers, stood a city. Mighty stone walls, dark Gothic towers reaching into the low leaden sky. Smoke from hundreds of chimneys drifted over the roofs, mixing with a fine, nasty drizzle. I knew this place. I recognized it at first glance. It was Windhelm, the city of kings, just as I'd seen it hundreds of times, but now it was real. I could smell it. Wet stone, pine resin, burnt wood, rotten fish, and something else. Animalistic. Elusive. I could hear its voice. Distant cries of merchants, dogs barking, the creak of carts, the murmur of voices behind the walls. Where am I? My own words were a strange, ragged whisper. "Where else?" the guy snorted. "In Skyrim. Made it to Windhelm. Your tub, the storm petrel, was it? The storm smashed it on the reefs last night. We were picking up wreckage and people. You could say death, dragged away by your beard. You were holding onto a splinter like a banshee clings to a sinner's soul." Something clicked in my head. Skyrim. Shipwreck. It was all painfully familiar. That's the starting setup for a character who doesn't come from the Imperial cart. But that's a game. A game I played. I looked at my hands again, dirty, covered in scrapes and bruises, the pads of my fingers white from water. I clenched them into fists. I felt the muscles tense, my nails digging into my palms. This doesn't happen. In games, there is no pain like this, no cold like this, no smells like this. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was so stunningly real that the realization sent shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "What's my name?" I suddenly asked the rower, a desperate hope stirring in my chest. Maybe I'm just some other guy, not Artyom? He laughed hoarsely again. "How should I know? Maybe it's Talos, maybe it's Junior the sheep. The papers in your pockets were just wet pulp. Pick any name you like before they ask you at the castle. Hey, look!" He nodded somewhere over the side. I looked and froze. An enormous frost-covered dragon glided past us, its wing nearly scraping the boat. Its scales had a steely blue sheen, and the powerful beats of its wings sent ripples across the water. It flew so low I could see the membranes on its wings, smell the animalistic wild scent of beast and ancient magic coming from it. It let out a low, guttural cry that made everything inside me shudder and flew off toward the castle. My legs went weak. I grabbed the side of the boat to keep from collapsing back to the bottom. See that? The rower wasn't even surprised, just spat into the water. Lately, the damned things are as common as mud after rain, popping up here and there, scaring couriers, stealing sheep. No normal life to be had. At that moment, the boat bumped with a dull thud against the wooden piles of the dock. The journey was over. "Well, get out," said my savior, offering me a hand. His palm was rough as sandpaper. "Good luck to you, stranger." I'd head to the Candlehearth Hall. Decent tavern, you can warm up, find some food. Tell them Rolf Theodoric sent you, they might give you a discount. Staggering, I climbed out onto the unsteady planks of the dock. My legs barely obeyed, the ground swaying underfoot as if I were still on the boat. I stood there dumbly staring at my new world. At the rough faces of the Nords unloading barrels of fish, at the guards in the blue uniforms of the Stormcloaks lazily pacing the walls, at the beggars huddled by the huge city gates. This was Skyrim, real, alive, and deadly dangerous. I had nothing. No money, no weapons, no name, no past. Just the wet clothes on my back, a wild animal terror inside, and one single desperate piece of knowledge burned into me by hundreds of hours of gameplay. I know what happens here. I know about the Civil War, the return of the dragons, the Dragonborn. But I also knew something else. Here you could die from hunger, from the cold, from a bandit's arrow, from a wolf's claws, from a simple infected wound. And there would be no loading a previous save. I took a deep breath. The air was cold and sharp. It smelled of hope, fear, and hearth smoke. I needed to survive, right now. First step, find that tavern. Candlehearth Hall. Get warm, figure out a plan. I took a step forward toward the huge, gloomy gates of Windhelm. My adventure had begun, and I already felt that every second in this world would be a struggle, a fight for the life I'd been given against all odds. I stood on the slippery planks of the dock, and the world swam around me, not from the swaying, but from the realization of what had happened. Windhelm. It was exactly as the artists at Bethesda had created it, yet so alive, detailed, and hostile that it took my breath away. Every seagull's cry, every creak of a cartwheel, every fragment of conversation in the Nordic tongue I didn't understand. It all hit my brain like a hammer. Candlehearth Hall. Need to find Candlehearth Hall. Tavern, warmth, food, a plan. I staggered down the dirty street leading from the dock to the main city gates. Hulking Nords in chainmail with axes on their backs overtook me, throwing sidelong, appraising glances my way. I, skinny in the wet, ridiculous clothes of my world, a print t-shirt and jeans long turned into torn, dirty rags, felt naked and utterly defenseless. Their looks said it all. Outsider, weakling, prey. The city gates were enormous, made of wood blackened by time, bound with thick iron bands. Two guards in blue cloaks with the Stormcloak emblem leaned lazily on their halberds. One of them, his face scarred, ran a mocking gaze over me. "Hey, bag of bones," he rasped. "Looking for a place to crash? Ever tried sweeping streets? You smell like a harpy in heat." His partner snorted. I stayed silent, just looked down and slipped through the open gates. My heart was pounding in my throat. Humiliation and fear burned my cheeks. I was nobody, a beggar, an empty space. In the game, I'd have already used a dragon shout and sent them both flying. Here I could only be silent and endure. Inside, Windhelm was even gloomier. Stone, sullen houses, narrow streets covered in perpetual filth and a layer of unmelted snow. The air was thick with smells, stewed meat, beer, human waste, and unwashed bodies. No romantic medievalism, a heavy, dirty, stinking reality. Candlehearth Hall was easy to find. It was one of the liveliest places in the Stone Quarter. A buzz of voices and the clatter of mugs came from behind the door. I pushed open the heavy oak door and froze on the threshold. Warmth. Coming from a huge fireplace, it wrapped around me like a blanket. The smell of roasted meat, onion soup, and fresh bread hit my nostrils, and my stomach growled so loudly that a few patrons at a nearby table turned around. I walked up to the counter, behind which stood a portly woman with intelligent, tired eyes and thick, dark hair pulled into a bun. I need something to eat and to warm up, I hissed, feeling my whole body tremble. Looks like you need everything at once, she said, without much kindness but without malice either, giving my pitiful figure an appraising look. Rolf said he'd send some poor soul. Guess that's you. Sit by the fire. I'll bring you some stew and bread, and ale. For a hangover or a dip in the sea, there's no better cure. 5 minutes later, I was sitting on a rough stool by the fire, clutching a clay mug of dark, bitter ale in my frozen fingers and greedily devouring a bowl of thick stew with a piece of black bread. It was the most delicious soup of my life. Every spoonful brought me back to life, spreading a revitalizing warmth through my body. The shivering gradually subsided. I introduced myself to the innkeeper, Haldira, as Orion. The name came on its own from somewhere deep in my memory, sounding alien but fitting. She nodded, not particularly interested. "Want to stay?" she asked when I'd emptied the bowl. "Not much work for the likes of you. But sweeping floors, washing dishes, carrying firewood, you can do that. For that, a roof in the attic and food. Won't feast, but won't starve." I agreed almost immediately. It was a chance. A roof over my head. Food. Time to pull myself together, look around, understand what to do next. My knowledge of Skyrim was my main asset, but using it right away without strength, without understanding the real, not game rules of this world would be suicide. So began my first days in Windhelm. My world became the attic above the tavern, crammed with old barrels and hay and the tavern itself. I swept floors, scrubbed copper mugs until they shone, hauled heavy bundles of firewood from the yard. The work was hard, humiliating for a former IT guy, but it gave me a sense of purpose. I listened. I absorbed every word, every piece of gossip the patrons exchanged. And I learned a lot. The Civil War wasn't background noise, but a bloody reality. People talked about lost sons, ravaged farms, about the cruelty of both the Imperial Legion and the Stormcloaks. Ulfric Stormcloak was a hero to some, a traitor who plunged the country into chaos to others. Dragons weren't a game element, but a real calamity. They talked of burned caravans, attacks on small homesteads. People were afraid. And I also learned that magic here wasn't just an animation on a screen. One day, a mage from the College of Winterhold walked into the tavern, a haughty Altmer in luxurious robes. He ordered wine, and his fingers, snapping, struck a tiny spark that lit the candle on his table. I froze, staring at him. It wasn't computer graphics, it was real magic. The air trembled with energy, smelling of ozone. He noticed my stare and looked at me coldly, with contempt, making me turn away. In the evenings, when work was done, I would sneak onto the city walls and look at the harsh landscapes of Skyrim, the snowy peaks, the dark taiga, the distant lights of other settlements. This world was huge, frightening, and beautiful. And I was a part of it, truly. One day, Haldira gave me a task to deliver an order of ale and provisions to the palace, the residence of Ulfric Stormcloak. My heart skipped a beat. See him? The legend of the game in the flesh? The palace inside was gloomy and austere. Warriors in heavy armor with cold eyes watched me, a servant. In the main hall by the throne stood he, Ulfric, tall, powerful, with an authoritative face and a piercing gaze. He was arguing with his military commander, Galmar Stonefist, and in the heat of the argument he shouted. It wasn't a shout of rage, it was a word of power, Fus. The air in front of him shuddered and slammed into the stone wall, noisily throwing back a shield that stood there. The recoil, the wave of force, pushed even him back a step. I felt it even from a distance, a slight pressure on my eardrums, a vibration in my chest. It wasn't a sound effect, it was a raw, unbridled force tearing its way out. That evening back at the tavern, I couldn't sleep. I had seen magic, I had seen the Thu'um. This world operated by its own laws, and power here was utterly real and attainable. But how? I wasn't the Dragonborn. I didn't have a menu where I could put points into skills. Despair began to creep up on me. What could I do? Wash floors in a tavern forever until a dragon burned the city to ashes? Or until a band of marauders cut everyone down on their way? The turning point came a couple of weeks later. A drunken, rowdy group of Stormcloaks burst into the tavern. They demanded more ale, acting arrogantly and provocatively. Haldira tried to calm them down, but one of them, a huge brute with a face twisted in anger, grabbed her by the arm. "Your prices are inflated, traitor," he roared. "For true patriots of Skyrim, there should be a discount." I was standing in a corner with a rag in my hand. Instinct screamed at me to freeze, not to stick out. But Haldira, though stern, was the only person who had shown me a drop of pity in this world. And I saw the fear in her eyes. I didn't think. I grabbed the first thing that came to hand, a heavy wooden tankard, and threw it at the thug with all my might. I wasn't aiming, just threw. Adrenaline fogged my mind. The tankard flew past, smashed against the wall, and shattered. A dead silence fell over the tavern. Everyone turned to look at me. The thug slowly released Haldira's arm and turned toward me. His face was crimson with rage. "What's this shit stirring underfoot?" He took a step toward me. "Imperial pup defending your bitch." He was twice my width and obviously stronger. I backed away until my back hit the wall. Fear paralyzed me. I saw his hand reach for the handle of the axe on his belt. And then something happened to me. A desperate fury mixed with fear burst out. It wasn't a shout, not a word. It was a pure animal impulse, a desire to stop him, to push him away, to make him shut up. I exhaled. and not just exhaled. I felt something tear out from the very depths of my chest, scraping my throat raw. It was like a quiet, stifled whisper full of incredible force. Fuzz. The effect was negligible compared to what Ulfric had demonstrated. No shockwave. But the air in front of me wavered. Dust on the floor swirled up in a small vortex. A candle on the nearest table went out, as if from a gust of wind. The thug froze mid-step. He wasn't thrown back, but he felt something. A slight push in his chest, a strange, disturbing vibration in the air. He looked at me with sudden bewilderment and dawning wariness. "What was that?" he grumbled. "Some kind of witchcraft." That brief moment of confusion was enough. Haldira, seizing the pause, barked at him. "Enough! Get out of my tavern before I call the guards, and I don't want to see you here again." The tension broke. The thug's friends, also stunned, dragged him toward the exit, muttering something. The door slammed shut. Silence reigned in the tavern again. Everyone was looking at me. I stood leaning against the wall, breathing heavily. Everything inside was burning. My throat felt raw as if I'd swallowed hot coals, but a wild, ecstatic feeling danced in my chest. It had worked. Barely noticeable, maybe almost imaginary, but it had worked. Haldira approached me. Her look was complex. There was gratitude, fear, and curiosity in it. "What was that, boy?" she asked quietly. "How do you know that?" I don't know," I answered honestly, and my voice was hoarse, foreign.